Good afternoon, good night, actually. I messed that up. I apologize, everyone. But may I introduce you all again to Teabag Spartans live podcast. I'm your host, Jacob, and I am joined again with Xander. How are you doing today, Xander?
Oh, I'm doing just wonderful. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing fantastic. Today, ironically, we are joined by a good friend of mine. His name is Michael, and I would let him allow himself to introduce himself to you. He is currently the non-official sponsor of our podcast. So, Michael, please allow yourself to introduce yourself to our podcast.
Howdy, I'm Michael, and I run this little shop on Etsy where I make cosplay-related items. It's all Halo right now, but I'm looking into doing other things like Star Wars and other mostly sci-fi cosplay-related items, but that's what I've been doing recently. It's been going pretty well.
That's fantastic. Now, Michael, is there a link for this Etsy shop?
Yeah, it's the Cosplay Zone on Etsy, and if you go to Instagram and you look up the Cosplay Zone with underscores in between everything, there'll be a link in the description.
I gotcha, and I will include a link in my description as well, so we are able to do it. I will also be linking everybody's Instagram in the bio below on YouTube if you are watching this on YouTube. Now, today's podcast will incorporate 3 segments. It is going to incorporate, firstly, the news going on with Halo Infinite, which Michael will be incorporated in so we can ask him questions, how he feels about it, because he is as well as Halo fan as me and Xander are. Then for the other 2 segments, that'll only be me and Xander. We'll be going over the Last Light book, written by Xander. If you could help me out with this information, I'm kind of blanking. Xander?
The Last Light book was written by, oh god, I'm drawing a blank too. Hold on, I literally
Troy
have
Denning?
it right here. I think it was Troy Denning.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was Troy Denning. And at the end, we're going to be going back to our bracket. And today, we are going to be pitting up against Spartan Randall, up against Spartan Linda to see who wins that and moves up in the bracket. So, first thing of our first segment, which I think we're all very well aware of, is the fact that Halo Infinite was pushed back a year. So, I want to ask our guest first. Michael, how do you feel about Halo Infinite being pushed back?
Honestly, I think it's a good thing based off of like what we got to actually see from the gameplay trailer and the campaign trailer. Is it didn't look very polished, and everybody's been saying it had a very plastic look, which I agree with. And I feel like this extra time is something that is needed, and I feel like it's something the fans deserve. If this is going to be the new Halo for the next 10 years, I think they should make it the best they can before releasing it and getting rid of all the bugs and everything.
I agree with that. Xander, how about yourself? How do you feel about everything's going on?
I mean, I definitely think it was a good move just based on what they presented to us. I didn't think, I mean, my biggest concern really is how this is going to impact it being shipped on multiple consoles. By that, what I mean is it's pretty clear that what they were showing us, at least in my opinion, was the definition that you would expect to run on the Xbox One. And they didn't say, you know, this is just for the One X series, the top series. No, this is going to work on the Xbox One. The Xbox One's half a decade old. It's not going to be able to support a game like Halo Infinite. So I have a feeling as they go through this, they're going to look at themselves and say, this ain't going to work. It's only going to be on the new series game, which is it's going to be pretty lousy. It's going to really force some people to spend that money, and that new system's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah, and I completely agree with both your guys' standpoints. I agree with Michael's idea that they're going to repolish the game a little bit here, because let's look at it from a technical standpoint. 343 has gone and stated before that this iteration of the demo was an earlier version, but the most stable version that they could use to play the game. But going back and adding some details such as the regular old Magnum and the regular old shotgun is a fantastic idea. We only got to see so many different weapons. We got to obviously the assault rifle back from the Halo Reach design. We got to see the battle rifle that looked somewhat in between Halo 2 and Halo 3. We got to see an energy sword, but everything else was different. So, you know, from that standing point, it definitely would make sense for them to upgrade and install new things so we can develop a better game. I also agree with Alex where, you know, you have forced, I'm blanking on the word, it's when you're obsolescence. You have forced obsolescence. So the Xbox One, yes, is over half a decade old, and Xbox and Microsoft is known as a company that would like to benefit from the sheer fact that, like, we cannot use the older consoles and just move on. All right, so I would like to also ask both of you how you feel about the iteration of the new Xbox and how Halo will work on it. I'm going to let our guest go first.
Well, I believe with the new Xbox, and hopefully there's a huge performance increase. I haven't seen the specs they're actually going to add, but given that it's been such a long time, like half a decade, it should be able to run like what most high-quality gaming PCs are at the moment. And also, with the new addition of adding Halo to PC, I feel like they should really focus on making it cross-platform as well. If both of the systems are going to be like compatible and they're trying to compete for that market of combining gaming consoles with PCs and getting that graphics quality to be relatively the same, and if they're going to merge what was once an Xbox exclusive onto all Microsoft platforms, I feel like that would be a good move as well with the new like launch of this new console.
Okay, Xander, how about you feel about it?
I mean, from the way they've described it, this new system is supposed to be a tank. Now, saying that, in my opinion, I don't know if either of you have the One X. I think that thing's already a tank, so I'm just really hoping that whatever we get is like head and shoulders above that, because even the difference between the One S, which I had before, and then I upgraded to the One X, it was an impressive jump. So if the quality is there to match the price, like if it's like, oh my God, blows me away, I'm fine with it. But if you plug it in and you're like, you know, it's good, but like if I have room to even have a butt moment, I won't lie. They're like $800. I don't want to have butt moments for $800.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So our next little news story that we have based around Halo Infinite is the sheer fact that there's a lot of questions going around the fact that this is apparently the next Halo for the next 10 years. So they really have to show up and give us a lot of extra DLC or extra story or extra just whatever we can get, because Halo 5 has been out there for 5 years at this point. And Halo 5 didn't offer a lot of things to us that were new. So I'd like to ask, because one of the reasons that this Infinite delay was actually put in place was because they were going to release Infinite with a lot of DLC story. So you had to buy the DLC to add on to the overall experience of the campaign. So again, I'm going to go with Michael and asking, how do you feel about that?
I feel like that with having to buy DLC for a campaign is something that is going to start fading out. Like the same thing with, they're making a lot of free-to-play games because of microtransactions, but I feel like it's justified if there isn't microtransactions to add DLC is what I'm thinking, because then you're not only getting content, but like it feels more well worth than like say a gambling system or something. And I feel like if you're adding on DLC to a base game, that could just be because they are still making it, because it is going to be 10 years. They can keep adding on, which I do like that there's going to be constantly something new and fresh, but I don't want it to become kind of a Destiny situation, and where it did have more DLC, but I feel like the Destiny DLC wasn't really giving people what they wanted, and when they went to the whole free-to-play route for the entire game, I felt like it kind of ruined that game, and I don't want to see Halo fall into the same pit that Destiny did with that whole DLC aspect.
Which is actually, I gotta elaborate on what you just said. it's kind of sad because, Bungie was the original developers of Halo, and they've strayed away so far from the original Halo and their design for the game. It's almost saddening to think that they're now comparable to Destiny and microtransactions. So Xander, I want to ask how you would elaborate on that.
Well, I mean, and I talked about this just a touch last week when I said whether or not I'm paying, for me, is going to be based on what I'm paying for. I would rather pay for like good extra story content than I would, like a play to win system or aggressive microtransactions, like our guest just laid out. And I mean, you could make people with the right additions. You could hype the hell out of this thing.
That's true.
You could really make it something impressive. If you look what Halo Wars 2 did with Awakening the Nightmare, you could take.
Xander. Okay, guys, I apologize that we had to freeze there for a minute. We got a little bit of technical. Alrighty, folks. We are back, and Xander is going to be introducing this section. So, Xander, take it away.
All right, folks. So tonight we are going to be discussing Halo Last Light, one of the books in the Halo Expanded Universe by Troy Dennings. Now, this is really just a fun book. And I'll give you we'll start with a brief synopsis, then me and Jake will talk about our thoughts on it. And if you guys have any questions or thoughts, please let us know what you're thinking. So, book Last Light takes place shortly, I will use the word shortly after, I believe, the events of Halo 3, prior to the rediscovery of the Master Chief in Halo 4. And it follows the remainder of Blue Team, that being Fred, Linda, and Kelly, along with a group of Spartan 3s that are sort of filling in on Blue Team. And they are on the, not the insurrectionist controlled, but the free world, not associated with the UNSC, of, I believe it's pronounced Gaio, or Gao, or I won't pretend to know how to say that. But they are there with a xeno-archaeological group known as the 717th Battalion. And it's one of Oni's groups that all they do is investigate Forerunner activity. And it turns out that on the planet there is a Forerunner base that has been discovered. It set off some type of a pulse, or rather, it was activated by a pulse that received from a nearby planet. And the details of that I won't cover too extensively. If you want to know what activated that installation, go and read the Kilo 5 trilogy. It's probably one of the best in the series, and it ties everything together. But basically, we follow the events of a homicide detective named Vita Lopez, who is a Gao resident detective, and she has been connected with the UNSC to try and solve murders that have been taking place in one of their, I guess you'd call it their naturally occurring spas. And she's attached to the Spartans, and all the victims have been rather viciously killed in a manner that looks like something only a Spartan could do. I'm talking snapped femurs, crushed bodies. It's pretty grisly. And being a native of a free world, she doesn't trust the UNSC. Now, obviously, they know that it's being caused by some of the constructs in the Forerunner base, but they can't tell her that because, well, then they'd have to kill her. Anyway, moving forward, a coalition of a splinter covenant group known as the Keepers of the One Freedom and the minister of the protection force of Gal form sort of like a mini alliance to try and take the artifacts from the UNSC. And it results in a pretty pitched battle in the town outside of the search area. Blue team with the inspector, with Lopus, end up getting trapped underground. And during that time, the Spartan 3s, as they're called, run out of their antipsychotic drugs that they use to balance out their neural imbalances. These are the Gamma Spartans, Ash, Olivia, and Mark. And as Vita watches them do their thing, she begins to question whether or not these Spartans might actually be the ones responsible for the killings, in particular Mark, who is just sort of cocky and antagonistic. It's part of his character, but she doesn't understand that. In reality, it's all being performed by a Forerunner Archeon class AI known as Intrepid Eye. And she is attempting to contact the Forerunners because she's been awoken from stasis, has no idea what's going on. It's been 100,000 years, yada yada. Basically, the Spartans fight their way out of the caves, take the fight to the surface, and when they realize, when the keepers of the One Freedom, led by the brute chieftain Castor, realize that they have secured the AI, they shoot down the Falcon that Fred is on, forcing the rest of the blue team to go and recover him. And the battle continues. During this, the head of the Gal Defense Force stages a coup to try and get rid of the UNSC. And so there's more fighting, rebel activity. They send in their local militia, and eventually the UNSC with Blue Team leave the planet while detonating a excavation-grade Havoc nuke to cover up the Forerunner base. And when they get into orbit, they meet Admiral Osman, for those of you, again, who are fans of the Kilo 5 trilogy, or Spartan Ops at this point. And Osman offers Vita, who now is in the know of everything, a job as a ONI special investigator. And since Vita knows everything about what her boss, the Ministry of Protection, had done, and if she went back, she'd most likely be killed to shut her up, she says, yeah, I'll take the job, which then transitions into the next book, which we will talk about at a later date. But that is a rough outline of the book. Jacob.
Yeah, Xander. So fantastic synopsis of the book, I may say. So essentially, I really love the part where Fred is actually I believe it was his armor was damaged, was heavily damaged during the fight, and he was in armor lock. And he tells Kelly, surprising, because he was. I'm hoping that I'm not going into the next book, Retribution. But he was there, and he was like, I need you to get this thing off me right now.
Yes, that happened in this book.
I found that very humorous, and alongside the Havoc nuke that was blown up with the Spartans, his armor was blown up as well.
Yes.
So I gotta ask a question. This is actually going into Halo Infinite. How do you feel they're gonna incorporate Castor into the Halo Infinite story?
Now, it's a very interesting question. The Keepers of the One Freedom are, like I said, they are a ex-Covenant group. They are religious fanatics, so they're not like the Banished, who don't care about religion. They believe very firmly in the gods. They just think that it was all the mistreatment of the prophets. Think of them like the Protestants and how they broke away from the Catholic Church. Like all this indulgence stuff is a bunch of, no, we're going to do our own thing, but we still believe in the same God. And Castor was a very, very capable war chieftain. He was actually a member of the Blood Stars. So Castor was a packmate of Atriox during the Human Covenant War. Little fun fact.
And yeah, that's. I wonder if that's going to have any correlation with Atriox, because Castor was very brutally wounded. In the next book, we will go over that when we go over that. And Atriox had also convinced the Silent Shadow, which was a fanatical group of Sangheili, to go after, essentially, not to go after the leader of the Silent Shadow and then join with Atriox, which is hilarious to think about if you really look into it.
Yeah, it is, but it's a tough question. And when I say it's a tough question, because while both brutes denounced the prophets, Atriox said, all this religious stuff, it's junk, we don't need it. It is not beneficial. If you fight only because you want to. Whereas Castor, no, we still fight for the gods. And I feel like that would leave a very bad taste in Atriox's mouth if they were to meet again, because Atriox is just a very upfront type of guy with his men. I think he'd say, you're talking crazy. This is what put us in chains in the first place. Don't fall for this. And, you know, if you've ever seen a pious individual and an atheist argue, picture that, but they're 9.5 feet tall and they have gravity hammers.
Yeah. Truly, I don't think Atriox is going to go into combat with Castor, because Atriox is a talker. He's intelligent for being a brute. He realizes the BS that the prophets were telling him, and he just kind of moved along with his life. He left. So, going back into the story, how do you think Veda Lopez and her introduction into the story was handled?
I thought, and this is just me, I thought Veda was great. She was very competent. You got sprinkles throughout the story that something very bad had happened to her. It seemed like maybe she had been like kidnapped or something, along with possibly some other unpleasant things that we'll keep this PG, read the book if you want to know, that just made her very distrusting. And as such, she decided, rather than running from her trauma, her way of working through it was becoming a cop and stopping people like that. She was actually very clear in the book that she didn't catch criminals, she delivered justice. So rather than finding killers and taking the police, she would shoot them. It was very, very not so subtly announced many times, I delivered justice, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And she was very antagonistic in her own way.
Yeah, you're definitely hitting it right on the ball there, man. There's not really much else to say about it besides that. So here's something that we could look into. How do you feel the Spartan 3s were handled with the lack of smoothers, and how Spartan Fred 104, which, as you may know from previous iterations of the podcast, he is my favorite Spartan. How he handled their psychosis.
So, I think one of the things that was very well done was the portrayal of the mental instability, and by that I mean it wasn't uniform. They manifested their paranoia, their irritation, their discomfort in different ways, which is realistic. A lot of times people think, well, this is how all people are if they're, anxious, if they're angry, if they're this, whatever it might be. Having worked with patients who were psychotic, patients with delusions, especially persecutory or paranoid delusions, the context can really vary wildly. Sometimes someone's trying to get them, someone's trying to hurt their family, someone's trying to put a chip in their brain. There's very rarely a theme that's, superimposed over all of it. So When it was like this person was just slightly irritable. She was shifting his weight. He wasn't really answering questions, whereas this one's holding a knife to a Marine's throat and saying, "Lieutenant, he's an infiltrator. He didn't know the password." When the guy says, you used a 3-day-old challenge phrase, because they'd been stuck underground. So it was very clear. And also the way they friendly, they sort of joked about it in a friendly way. We might be crazy, but this. And a lot of times it becomes a strength, where it's just because I have this certain neurochemical disability or this certain diagnosis, it doesn't define me. It's one of the things we emphasize in the mental health field. It's called a strength-based and holistic approach. You're not your diagnosis. You're a gestalt. You're many things. Your diagnosis is just a part of the whole, and it is not the thing that defines you.
Yeah, that's completely understandable, man.
Yeah.
We have a certain idea of how people should act,
We definitely do. And those ideas are based on what's quote-unquote normal. The problem is we don't recognize that there's many factors that impact our idea of normal. Religious and ethnic background, socioeconomic standing, region, dialect. There's so many things. The way someone acts here in, the shadow of the city of Philadelphia where we live versus the way someone might act about something in Texas or Hawaii or, hell, anywhere. I should, wow, my brain just blanked on places outside of the U.S. I think I need more sleep.
I think everybody needs some more sleep nowadays, especially with this stuff going on in life. We kind of neglect sleep at this point. But yeah, man, if you really look at it from a standpoint of how people should act, we just have this fantasy of how individuals should and will act. So, moving on to the next question about the book. How do you feel they handled certain characters like Fred, Kelly, and Linda?
So I have to say, one of the things that bummed me out was how little you see Kelly and Linda in this book. I'll run down real quick the Spartans that you saw in this book. Fred, Linda, and Kelly, the original members of Blue Team, along with Spartan 3's Tom and Lucy of Beta Company. And again, you had Olivia, Mark, and Ash from Spartan 3 Gamma Company. The Gamma Spartans and Fred were the ones who went down into the cave system and got stuck down there, while Kelly, Linda, and the Beta Company Spartans were left patrolling the town of Wendosa, I believe it was, and they got caught up in the fighting with the Keepers and the Rebels, which is pretty much what they were doing, was running disturbance. Every time a group of Keepers would gather for an assault, bam, there was the rest of Blue Team to break it up. So we spent most of our time with Fred, Fred's a great character in the expanded universe. He's sarcastic, and he's also very human. He's a little fun-loving, he loves to push people a little bit. He's not as serious as the Master Chief is, and he's just he's warm even in the face of antagonism. Like, there's a part in the book where Vita quite literally says, that's what you just did is a good way to get shot. And he's like, let me pull up the specs on your gun. And he does, and he's like, it wouldn't even dent the outer shell of my weapon. The outer shell of my armor. He wasn't like, don't threaten me or else, or some, canned special forces, tough guy response. It's just like, that wouldn't hurt me.
Yeah. So we're heading up on 2 minutes left of this one segment. So any final thoughts on Last Light, Xander?
Final thoughts. I would greatly recommend this book to anyone who enjoys the lore, anyone who enjoys Fred, and anyone who really just wants to get a little bit more exposure to the Spartan 3s. If you read Ghost of Onyx and you're like, I want more of the Gammas, this is a great book to go to. It's a lot of fun. You have a little murder mystery, which is not something you see in the Halo universe. And also their difficulties interacting with people that don't really like them, which you don't get a whole lot of in the universe either, at least not in a whole world sense. You'll get pockets of people, but it's like, no, our whole planet doesn't want you here. Go to hell. It's like, whoa, is that how you feel to the people that saved the human race? Okay.
Yeah, and you also get some political sense for like the Halo universe in this book. So it's a fantastic book. Me and Xander have both read it. I would highly recommend it for myself, the host. It is a fantastic book, and the follow-up book, while it may be confusing, it is also still a fantastic book. So, moving on, we're going to be taking a break here shortly. We're going to be going over our next versus match, where I will be defending Spartan Randall, and my co-host Xander here will be going and defending Linda. So let's see how that goes. Thank you guys so much for listening in, and stay tuned for that. Alrighty, folks. Thank you for waiting on the live stream. For you people on YouTube, that was just instantaneous. So, I'm going to let my co-host Xander give the explanation of Linda, give a little background knowledge, and give her qualities that she's good at. So go ahead.
Okie dokie. So, Linda Pravdin, also known as Sierra 058, was born March 19th, 2511 on the outer colony world of Verant. She was taken care of by her mother, who was a single parent, and Linda was the very first child identified as a candidate for the Spartan 2 program. She was noticed by Dr. Halsey after it came to light that Linda had developed her own intelligence system to spy on her teachers in her classes. So she developed, at the age of, I believe she was 5 at the time, a surveillance system that she could set up in her classrooms to get answers to tests and things like that. She was very, very crafty. She was obviously replaced with a flash clone and taken to Reach, where she was conscripted into the Spartan program. Some of her more notable actions were taking part in 189 military operations, of which 174 of them were full campaigns. Linda spent the majority of her time as the primary scout sniper for Blue Team, and Linda was noted as being the best sniper, and I emphasize the best sniper in human history. One of the things that she accomplished was during the Battle of Onyx, she made a shot on a sentinel pair from over 2 kilometers away, lying flat on her back, because this particular sentinel was on overwatch. Probably her most impressive feat was during Operation First Strike, the Spartan-led initiative to destroy the unyielding Hierophant, which was a Covenant command and support superstructure that was amassing a fleet to attack Earth. Linda, attempting to cover the other Spartans while they retreated, found a suitable place it was like a network of very powerful artificial lights where she couldn't be seen because the light was blinding. She then proceeded to hang upside down by a reinforced cable, and holding her sniper rifle with one hand, shot 4 Banshee pilots out of their craft so that Blue Team could secure them for escape. She also took place in numerous battles during the Siege of Earth prior to the events of Halo 3, including the destruction of the Havana space elevator and the recovery of the Fenris warheads with the other members of Blue Team. That was right before she was recalled to Onyx to take part in that particular series of events. One other thing, little Easter egg that I'll throw out there, was Linda was actually aboard the Pillar of Autumn in the events of Halo 1. She had been critically injured during a attempted nav data breach on a Reach orbital dock going after an Oni vessel called the Circumference. And she was shot many times by amalgamation of elites and jackals. Her cryopod was ejected before the Autumn landed on the ring, and it was recovered by the Master Chief in between the events of Halo 1 and Halo 2. Read First Strike, great book. And she was quite literally brought back to life after some major organ replacement surgeries by Dr. Catherine Halsey. I don't really know if there's a lot more to say about Linda. Other quick notable things: she was the first female Spartan to recover from the effects of the augmentation. She was noted to be very, very tough. Within just, I think it was 3 days after having her lungs, kidneys, and liver all replaced by Dr. Halsey, she took part in Operation First Strike. She wasn't even completely mobile.
All right, fantastic explanation. So now I'll be going over Spartan Randall. His Spartan number was Randall 037. Randall Aiken was born in 2511 on the homeworld of Ingold, which is on Earth. England. I am so sorry. My gosh. As Alex or Xander has said, I need some sleep. The Office of Naval Intelligence, he was abducted by the Office of Naval Intelligence for the classified Spartan 2 program at the age of 6 in 2517. Around 2527, Randall caught a fellow Spartan, Soren 066, and an insurrectionist named Parchik. Am I pronouncing that, Xander, correctly?
It's either Parchik or Parched. It's a weird spelling.
All right. Breaking into a lab within the Reach Fleetcom military complex. Being suspicious of their activities, he escorted them outside to verify why they were there. Soren attacked Randall as they were leaving, and in a brief struggle, Partak shot him with a tranquilizer dart, knocking him out, and allowing them to escape. Afterwards, Mendez reported to Catherine Elizabeth Halsey that Randall was doing fine, but was angered with himself for letting his guard down. Mendez said that he had not let it down much, that he had done what he could, and it was good for him to go through something like that because it would make him a better soldier in the long run. The Battle of Vodin and life as a colonist. During the Human Covenant War, Randall 037 participated in 59 battles and military operations. His last official service as a Spartan 2 was in 2532 in the Battle of Vodin, where he was listed as missing in action during the planet's orbital space engagement with the Covenant. He fell from the planet's skyhooks into Vodin's atmosphere and plunged to the surface, only to survive the impact by landing in an ocean on the planet. He was rescued days later by local survivors and lived with them following the battle. Shredded and isolated from the UNSC contact, Randall lived with survivors for a full decade and was married to one of the colonists. When contact with the UNSC was established, Randall, now going by the name Aiken, maintained a low profile and preferred to stay with his wife and strong societal ties on Vodin, then returning to service with the UNSC. In 2545, Aiken and his wife had a daughter named Natalie. Unfortunately, Aiken's wife died during childbirth in 2546. Oni managed to locate Randall and made plans to reintegrate him into service, as they viewed him as a huge investment of the Spartan II program. When Aiken refused, Oni deemed him compromised and no longer viable as a Spartan, and so made plans to decommission him. Aiken forcefully and successfully refused this effort, but eventually negotiated a deal with the Oni, and they reversed many of his Spartan augmentations through an excruciating process in return for his release from service to the UNSC. This compromise was personally approved by Synicom Admiral Margaret Perengoski. After concluding his dealings with Oni, Aiken and his daughter left Vodin and headed to the outer colonies of Cedra, where he enrolled as a part of the Colonial Guard. Thanks in large part to his extensive training in history, by 2556 he advanced to the leader of the local wing of the Guard as a colonel. During and after the Human Covenant War, on February 7, 2556, the city of Cedra was attacked by a Sangali terrorist with a biological weapon. Many of civilians infected by this bioweapon were brought to Cedra's Colonial Guard Hospital, including Aiken's own daughter, Jordan Gaines, and Mason Hundley. 2 Office of Naval Intelligence operatives, also affected by the weapon, were initially denied treatment by Aiken due to his dislike of Oni. However, Lieutenant Commander Jameson Locke eventually convinced Aiken to allow their injuries to be treated. After discovering a Bactrian-class frigate used by terrorists to smuggle the weapon to the planet, Aiken agreed to work with Locke and his unit to track down a source of the element. Aiken violently interrogated the captured Ionet supplier of the terrorists named Axel about the identity of the tug's pilots. However, Locke was able to communicate with the alien and persuaded Axel to reveal what information he knew. It was soon discovered that the element used in the bioweapon was partially functioning section of the Installation 04, which had attempted an emergency slipspace jump in its destruction years earlier by the Master Chief. Locke and his unit planned to destroy the source of the element with a Havoc tactical nuclear weapon to prevent it from being used against humanity. After Aiken's daughter died of the infection, he and his Cedric Colonial Guard joined Locke, Oni's unit, and left together for the Halo Shard on D-81 LRT Condor ship. Unfortunately, during the events on Installation 04, it was said that his death was seen by Jameson Locke as he manually detonated the Havoc warhead, saving Locke and his fellow Colonial Guard. Personality traits. Randall was known for his remarkable history and deep-rooted mistrust for the Office of Naval Intelligence. During his Spartan II training, Randall showed a particular proficiency for his combat leadership. However, he was also less sociable than his other Spartan compatriots off the field. Randall shows a belief in the Norse afterlife of Valhalla, and believes that Oni agents, due to their nature, would not be allowed there. Despite his distrust of Oni, Randall grows to like and trust Commander Jameson Locke, and shows a belief that Locke's nature would allow him into Valhalla. After his daughter's death, Randall appears to have become somewhat suicidal, with nothing to live for, but preventing the bioweapon from being used against his own people again. He purposefully tricks Locke and Private Toledo Macer so that he will be the one performing the suicide mission of destroying the deposits with the nuclear weapon, while sparing both of their lives. So, now that we have all of that set, now we can decide whether or not what's going to happen here. So, Xander, well, I've been making the assumptions every week. Who do you think wins the battle this week?
I mean, I'll just say it straight up. I don't think that there's a way that Randall wins this, mainly because the extensive decommissioning of his augmentations, while still leaving him bigger and stronger than your average human, faster as well, obviously, would not make him an easy match for Linda, who is fully augmented. I tend to think, and this is just a guess, that Randall was probably decommissioned somewhere down to the level of a Spartan 4. Still impressively big and strong, but compared to a Spartan 2, the only reason that 4s can hold their own is because of their Mjolnir. And without the assistance of his augmentations, because they don't tell you which ones they decommission, I'm going to have to assume that Randall cannot wear Mjolnir. Mjolnir versus no Mjolnir, no, it's not happening.
And I simply agree with you on this sense. If we look at both Randall in his prime and Linda in in their prime, you just realize that there's a lot that's on Linda's game than there is on Randall's game. Just for the sheer fact of the matter that, Linda is the best shot in human history, and she could take Randall out from miles and miles and miles away. So there's really no fighting the fact that, we have Linda as our winning candidate. Randall, yes, while showing a lot of combative strategy, didn't have the personality or perseverance to continue on living, essentially, after, he lost everything, which is understandable, but a Spartan should be able to just keep going on.
Well, and one of the interesting things is Randall's personality, having that deep distrust for Oni. This unfortunate fact is, as a Spartan, any class of Spartan, you work for Oni. That's all you do. Whether or not you like that, whether they did try to distance themselves from it, they were an Oni asset. So it's kind of like, how are you going to work your entire life hating and distrusting your boss? It's going to be a hard work environment, as opposed to saying this is just how it is.
Yeah, that's really what it ends up being. So, guys, again, this may be a bit of a shorter podcast. However, me and Xander both need some sleep. We've been working a lot this week. So, thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And we will see you next Sunday with Teabag Spartans Halo podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and comment if you're on YouTube. And follow us on Spoon if you're listening to us live. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, folks.